which was extremely important for the pacification of this region. In any case, as we all know, military operations still be a factor in international relations, and we have, and you also have to know what assets you have to fulfill your task to realize your policies, because military force is an asset which can support very much all political activities. But let me come to my presentation. I prepared a brief presentation on an issue which seems to me very important, especially in this current situation and what we have in Ukraine. I would like to talk about the transatlantic bond, the transatlantic link, why it is important and how to strengthen it. The transatlantic link, along with the Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, is a fundamental to NATO. This is a relationship between both, let's say, sides of NATO and its United States and its European allies. This relationship is based on common perceptions and values, and not only has not lost its meaning, but in the context of the current situation in Ukraine, it is even more important. The intensity of the transatlantic bond is not something constant, of course. It evolves dynamically depending on US-EU assessment of risks and threats. And it depends on the policies pursued by European countries and the United States. The development of the European project, and in particular the ambition of creating a common foreign and security policy and the ambition of Europe to build up as a full-scale player in the world, inevitably results in an attempt to emancipate from the United States. This, of course, weakened the transatlantic bond. But I would like to quote John Kerry and what he mentioned during the Munich Security Conference of the current year. I quote, "The United States and Europe are most powerful when they are united in the name of peace and prosperity, when they aim at stronger defense and common security, and when they fight for freedom and common values. In order for them to meet the new challenges, the US will need the strong Europe, and Europe will need the engagement and power of the United States. The current crisis in Ukraine poses new challenges to the European and Euro-Atlantic security. Europe is far from being secure, and NATO plays and will play a major role in maintaining the European security. How to strengthen the transatlantic link should be one of the main topics during the upcoming NATO summit later this year in Dublin. The situation in Ukraine, the Crimea's accession by Russia, the use of supply of energy materials for political blackmail, and everything happening in the broad Black Sea region bring major challenges to the European security, and will undoubtedly have key significance for such a group of factors as European security itself, transatlantic bond, NATO capabilities, NATO-Russian relations, NATO's partnerships, etc. How to cope with these challenges? I think that currently there are more questions than answers, but putting the right questions, we can be better prepared for future policies. It seems that the pacification of Balkans at the end of the last century has brought us the sense of unchallenged security. The feeling that all problems of military and political nature in Europe are settled. That it is unlikely that a new conflict will appear. That NATO and Russia have built a relationship of trust at a very high level. And even the conflict between Russia and Georgia did not darken this rosy picture. It became a common perception that the European security is entirely guaranteed. This feeling has led to such policies as the US shift of its strategic focus from Europe to the Pacific. And for Europeans, they simply believe that the risk for Europe could arise only from remote regions. But what is happening in Ukraine represents a new challenge for all NATO countries, and at the same time, it is a reason to reassess some of our policies and views. In Ukraine, we see an attempt to redesign the state borders based on ethnic principles. It is a precedent in the modern history of Europe, which can endanger all our societies and our democracy. This is a new threat because there are no ethnically homogeneous countries in Europe. At the same time, using covert military operations with forces with no insignia is a direct challenge to the whole system of international relations. You remember that media called this little green man. It's a people with no insignia, people which mandate is not known, people and forces with no mandate. Who gave them authorization? Once again, this is a precedent and it's a challenge to the system of international relations. And I can tell you that until now, NATO was prepared to meet mainly old type of military risks. And it was not prepared for the mentioned ones. Having in mind that above that the focus from Europe should not be shifted. The US engagement in conflict resolution in former Yugoslavia has proven the political and military weight of the United States when it comes to the European security. In the light of the Ukrainian crisis, the US once again involved in European security, in particular using their diplomatic capacity, which confirms their ability to act in solving crises in Europe. It is obvious that the European Union alone cannot assume primary responsibility for the security in Europe yet. Moreover, it is very difficult for European countries to elaborate common position towards Russia. The reason is that there are significant differences in the relationship between the individual European countries with Russia, which are rooted in the political, economic, cultural, and other links and contradictions, and hamper the development of a common European policy towards Russia. In addition to this, I have to say that internally our societies are divided in the assessment of the Ukrainian crisis and the Russian activities. And we are now at the crossroads. According to the Secretary General of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, NATO and Russia have to decide which path to follow, cold cooperation or constructive engagement. And actually today, ministers of defense of NATO countries have discussions in Brussels to elaborate a common policy towards Russia. It is very important in the current situation to breach NATO and EU policies and activities. It will not be an easy task because we have to overcome a lot of political obstacles that arise from differences in interest shown by certain NATO member states. However, there should be an attempt and will to develop all the form of interaction between EU and NATO, between Europe and the United States. There should be detailed analysis of what European security means, what are the new risks and threats, and how to face and eliminate them. The role of European countries and the United States in guaranteeing European security should be reassessed. Europe has the ambition to be a global player, but it lacks means, especially military means. Europe either will increase the defense expenses or will face serious negative political consequences, which will undermine the image of Europe as a major player on the international political scene, which leads me actually to the next point. The next point is related to the military capabilities. The second important factor for the transatlantic bond of the relations between the United States and Europe is related to the development of defense capabilities. Unfortunately, NATO's European allies did not reach the necessary maturity of their policies. The European allies contribute to a much lesser degree than the United States to the military capabilities and the accomplishment of NATO's common policy. Undoubtedly, this has a negative impact on the transatlantic link because the main burden goes to the United States. On one hand, the significant decrease in European defense budget is an undeniable fact, but on the other hand, even the limited resources are not spent effectively. To some extent, it is a result of the world financial economic crisis, but at the same time, a lack of political will on behalf of the European allies to maintain their defense budget to the required level is ineffective in an effective spending is obvious. Of course, this critique goes also to Bulgaria. Bulgaria, for the last 4 or 5 years, has a defense budget which is about 1.3% of the GDP. According to the white paper on defense and the armed forces, Bulgarian defense budget should be at least 1.5%. But, you know, having in mind the different difficulties, economic difficulties, Bulgarian governments, and not only current one, but the governments before that, do not allocate the necessary resources for the defense. This of course is very troubling because this cannot allow Bulgaria to acquire a new defense platform, cannot allow to acquire capabilities to be used in the current security situation. Let me give you an example what this means, just to give you a flavor. If you don't have enough resources for modernization. For example, Bulgaria is a border country of European Union and NATO. It's external border. We have tasks related to the protection of this border, to implementation of activities which require modern air forces. What we do have in Bulgaria, we have old fighters which are Russian, which are Soviet production, and the maintenance of this aircraft depends 100% of the will of Russia to maintain and to keep these assets ready to be used in operation. Of course, we cannot afford to have any more such a situation, And we appealed to some other allies from NATO and European Union to assist Bulgaria to acquire new defense capabilities, because having in mind the current budget situation, having in mind how expensive are new assets, Bulgaria simply cannot afford. So greater degree of cooperation, of understanding is needed both within NATO and the European Union. It is also important that small countries, including Bulgaria, which are not able to acquire these capabilities, it is important to have a cohesion in policies of both NATO and European Union, because we simply cannot afford to have assets just for European Union or just for NATO. That's why Bulgaria and other countries appeal to vote to have closer cooperation between NATO and European Union. Actually, air conditioning is working or not? In a Munich Security Conference, the Foreign Minister of France, Laurent Fabius, has pointed out that there is, of course, trade relation between economics and security. And the recovery from the world financial and economic crisis does mean that the European allies will have the opportunity to reinvest in a steady defense policy. This, of course, is an opportunity, but we have to see whether there is a political will for such a policy realization. It's obvious that for the time being, Europe lacks critical military capabilities. The European Union is not able to lead and sustain a complex military operations without the United States. One example in this regard is the operation in Libya. It was obvious that European states lack some critical operational capabilities, which means that European defense needs the United States military power. This demonstrates once again that the European Union and the United States have to coordinate their forces. Big question is what the ambition of Europe in the security and military domain is. There are challenges such as different perceptions of national sovereignty, of individual states, different political ambitions, insufficient financial resources, which most challenge small states. Some new initiatives have already started to strengthen the transatlantic bond and to overcome the gap in the US and Europe's defense capabilities. NATO's Smart Defense Initiative and the Connected Forces Initiative could be the right solution. Together with the pooling and sharing initiatives of the European Union, they will help to achieve better defense spending and within EU NATO members, and to increase their interoperability in NATO, as well as to increase the defense capabilities. This will give European Union more capabilities for its own purposes, for its own operations, where and when NATO will not be involved. They also aim at maintaining the armed forces of member states connected and in constant interaction at a time when the number of NATO operations is decreasing. These initiatives allow the armed forces to be well prepared, trained, and equipped for future operations. One more issue I would like to stress on. It is, of course, of high importance for NATO unity that all member states feel that their security is guaranteed by the alliance. The ongoing crisis in Ukraine makes it very clear. It should be mentioned that NATO has not worked out contingency plans for the new member states yet. So, what that means? It means that the territory of Bulgaria, Romania, and some other new states are not covered with the NATO plans. There are no plans of NATO to be engaged in operations on these territories. Bulgaria and Romania insisted on elaboration of such plans for the Black Sea region, and I'm glad to tell you that NATO military bodies already started to work on these plans. It is obvious that the world we live in is far from being stable and secure. There are many challenges and threats which have to be tackled, and NATO and EU will be involved in this. Moreover, European Union and Russia, NATO-Russia relations are central to the European and transatlantic security. That's why a strong link between the United States and Europe and a coordination of policies towards Russia is needed. Maintaining and strengthening the relationship requires a strong political will from both sides of the Atlantic to invest more and in a smarter way in the development of defense capabilities and to have common assessment of security, risks, and threats. There is no clear recipe how to solve these issues. More discussions and analysis is needed, and I do believe that through such kinds of workshops, of summer schools, we can come to the common solution, to the right policies. I would like to thank you for the attention, and I will be glad to have a discussion with you. How do you see European, Euro-Atlantic security? What do you see is necessary to be done in this field? Of course, we can continue elaborating on the crisis in Ukraine. I know that you have a separate topic, not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, I think. But all these issues I was talking about are very much related to the situation in Ukraine. Thank you very much. And with your permission, I'll take off my jacket. As it should be, actually, in fact. Yeah. So, gentlemen, please be free if our ladies allow it. Okay. When we talk actually about relations between the United States and Europe, there is a clear division between old Europe and a new one. New NATO member countries would like to see more United States in the Europe. They would like to cooperate militarily with the United States. They receive bigger support from the United States. Let me just mention that in 2006, Bulgaria and the United States have signed a defense cooperation agreement. This agreement allows us to develop a full spectrum of relations in security and defense. Based on this agreement, we are developing common military facilities. This is facilities which can be used by United States forces and Bulgarian army, but they also can be used to train partners from other countries. And I think that with most of the countries you are representing here, we already have common exercises. According to this agreement, there are two big airfields which can be used by American forces and NATO, and there is one big training area. Actually, do we have from Romania somebody here? No? More or less the same facilities. They are on Romanian territory. And I do believe that Bulgaria and Romania have to put more efforts when we talk about Black Sea security. So there are a lot of possibilities for our both countries to cooperate and of course, these facilities which are constructed on Bulgarian and Romanian territory should be better used to strengthen the Black Sea security. Do we have from Black Sea countries here? Turkey? Georgia. Yes, please.
You already answered my question partly, but I wanted to stick on this point about what do we mean by Euro in the Euro-Atlantic relationship. You say there's a division between old and new Europe, there's a division between, I mean, not all EU members are part of NATO, so what do we mean by this Euro part of the Euro-Atlantic relation?
Yeah. Normally when we talk about the transatlantic link, it is the relation between United States and European countries, European countries which are members of NATO. What is common? It is the way European countries are preparing themselves for future operations. Actually, European countries invest less and less in security. In most of the countries, the budget for defense is about 1%. In some countries, it's even less than 1%. Having in mind that current platforms are extremely expensive, this budget does not allow these countries to have modern capability. This is one way of answering to your question. But of course, and I did say that new NATO member states, they are more pro-US oriented than the old ones. Why? Mainly because they do feel that because of the proximity to Russia, their security is not entirely guaranteed. And they do believe that the only country which has a political, economic, and mainly military power to guarantee their security is the United States. That's why these countries are much more pro-US oriented than old Europe. And I also mentioned that when European Union is building its own defense, it means that European Union has to emancipate from the United States. To what degree? This is a big question. So the most important question in the European defense is to what degree to free from the United States, to what degree to emancipate from NATO, to what degree to develop its own capabilities. But if European Union would like to develop its own capabilities, it means that either it will be coordinated with NATO, and it's okay, especially for small countries, or it will duplication. And I mentioned to you, small countries like Bulgaria cannot afford to have forces separately for European Union and its operations and missions, and for NATO. That's why my thesis is that there should be a very strong link between European Union and NATO. And of course, it requires strong political will. It's the responsibility of our politicians, to work in such a way not to duplicate efforts and resources. Do we have from Ukraine somebody? You?
Me.
You're from military or?
Minister of Defense.
Minister of Defense. It will be interesting, of course, to know your opinion on what's going on, but it depends on you, of course.
You want to hear my opinion concerning the situation, or we get great assistance from NATO members countries. They did assist. We had a couple meetings with the defense secretary, Minister of Defense, and the executive set, and the NATO member countries and the like. They did assist us. And right now, the situation concerning the information you get from the mass media. And in Kiev, it's really, everything's really normal.
No, I know that the media sometimes is exaggerating the situation. They'll like, to show more nastiness, blood, etc., etc. I see that somebody would like to ask a question. Yes, of course.
I would like to ask a question on the defense capability of Bulgaria. You mentioned that some Bulgarian fighters are from the Soviet times, and so they cannot be used anymore efficiently without Russian help, and that's to say Russian control of the parts they give you. Is there any other element in the armed force of Bulgaria that needs to change in the same way, so that this factor is eradicated?
Good question, and let me give you more information than regarding defense capabilities of Bulgaria. Bulgaria, as you know, was a part of the Warsaw Pact, so most of its capabilities are Soviet-made or made according to the standards of the Warsaw Pact. Today, Bulgaria is a full NATO and EU member state. So we have to work together, to train together, and to participate in operations together with our allies from NATO and European Union. What means if you have old type of capabilities and NATO countries have different weapon systems? This means that you cannot cooperate effectively. This is unfortunately regarding each system, communication systems, aviation, naval forces, everything. So during the pre-accession period of Bulgaria to NATO, and after that, we invested a lot to improve these capabilities, to establish at least communication systems which are interoperable with NATO ones. But some major systems, which is, for example, fighters, it's extremely expensive system. All Bulgarian fighters, it's a MiG-29 and MiG-21. It's a Soviet type, it's Soviet production. If you need to maintain them, you have to go and ask Russian factories, which means Russian government, to allow you to do this repairment and to keep them flying.
But those are helicopters. MiGs are helicopters.
MiG is a fighter. It's an aircraft. Helicopter is Mi. We do have also Mi helicopters, Russians. But recently we acquired French helicopters, so there is no dependency in terms of helicopter fleet. But still, fighters, especially for the air policing, you know what's the air policing mission, especially to protect borders. It is absolutely necessary for every country, border country. And today, once again, we are dependent on Russian will. We are dependent on Russia's facilities, factories, to keep our fleet flying. What we have several programs in Bulgaria, which I mean is to increase capabilities and to replace old Soviet-style capabilities with new ones. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult task. Once again, new capability, new platforms are very expensive. We bought helicopters I mentioned from France. The total cost of these helicopters was almost equal, to 1 year's budget of the Ministry of Defense. Can you imagine this? Several years ago, we bought frigates from our ally country, let's say. Yeah, it's Belgium. I didn't want to mention because I want to give you an essence of this. We bought it on a political price. It was not purchasing from the company. Bulgarian government bought from Belgium, and it was affordable. Now we have 3 frigates from Belgium, which can be used in the Black Sea. These frigates operate also in other NATO missions. For example, they participated in active endeavor. So this is the only way for small countries to acquire new capabilities. Second-hand platforms from allied countries, of course, when these countries will not need these capabilities. Why Belgium sold these frigates to Bulgaria? They simply bought a new one. So some countries can afford to buy brand new systems, but some countries cannot. And this is, of course, a matter of political will, coordination, and understanding of the situation.
So is Bulgaria right now capable to secure its airspace?
We are doing air police. And according, sorry?
Yourselves you're doing.
Yes, with all this Russian or Soviet aircraft, we can do this because aircrafts are flying, they can shoot, etc., etc. But our pilots, when they participate in mission, so it's very difficult, to coordinate Soviet aircraft with F-16 or F-22 or whatever aircraft. You understand? This is the problem.
Do you think that's a realistic scenario that Russia says we don't support you anymore with your needs?
Yeah, of course.
But there were darker times, and I think Russia was keeping their contracts going they had with the Western countries. Or not?
Where is the problem? We do have a contract with the Russian factory, but this factory is controlled by the Russian government. You know what happened in Russia. The problem is that you cannot rely 100% that this contract will be fulfilled. It depends on the will of Russian government, on Mr. Putin. You see that they can use the supply of gas, for the blackmail to push other countries. They can do this, for example, regarding Bulgarian military assets. We cannot rely anymore on such a platform.
And on the gas thing on the market, I think that would be much harder than getting no mix anymore. I think you have to rely on Russia a bit or not.
It's of course difficult to say that Russia is not reliable one, but you need to have an assets to influence and to not allow such situation when Russia can fully control the supplies and can put the pressure on the government, on independent governments, in order to take a decision in one or another way. So that's why this is a matter of coordination of policies. matter of finding what assets you have to convince Russia not to behave in such a way. Actually, coming back to the situation in Ukraine, because I'm looking at it, and I also like to use this opportunity. To me, security in the Black Sea is threatened in several ways. And you will tell me where I'm right or not. First of all, it is the security situation in Ukraine. It's obvious that there are several regions which are not controlled by the central government. Let's say southeast part of Ukraine, which means that criminal activities and criminal groups can act in this region. I'm not sure about the control of the borders. What we see recently is that fighters, when we don't know who they are, these people are using manpads against Ukrainian helicopters and aircraft. You know what's manpad? Most of you probably know. It is the system which is you can shoot from your shoulder and to hit the airplane, which is preferred weapon for terrorists. And what we know now that such weapons are in the hands of people who are actually who they are, fighters or whoever.
Excuse me, that means it's like an RPG, or no?
It is like an RPG, but RPG is against the armored vehicles.
Okay.
And this system, it is man-portable air defense system, manpad. So you can shoot an aircraft, and not only military aircraft, but you can shoot a civilian one, which is very troublesome. I don't know how the situation in Ukraine will evolve, but it is sure already that all let's say contracts, all agreements in the security sphere in the Black Sea region are not working. There were several agreements signed by 6 Black Sea countries, which aim was training of military personnel, fighting terrorism, fighting illegal trafficking, etc., etc., etc. These agreements are not working anymore, which means that we have a security gap in the Black Sea region.
What can I say concerning this? I can say that the situation that is taking place right now, and Ukraine personally, it is a good example of that fact that not any country is in complete safety, because Ukraine is associated member of the EU. It takes part in all. It's the only country who, taking into account our non-block status, it takes part in all missions of NATO missions, and even taking into consideration all the facts, the Russian Federation held an act of aggression concerning Ukraine, and we said that some regions are not controlled by our government. It's not true, because after the elections, the situation is more or less stable, especially in the eastern regions. Those people, they're definitely terrorists, and concerning our borders, we get a state border guard service, and all means and equipment are concentrated on the eastern and northeastern borders of Ukraine. And I think we do our best to protect our country and to make the situation normal, to protect people, citizens.
To me, the biggest question is whether Ukraine will stay united, whether Ukraine will
Yes,
stay
it is.
in its borders.
It is.
And I know what this people from how to call them Russian-speaking territories. How do you call them? This I mean Kharkov, Lugansk, all this.
It's part of Ukraine, but they can, the language is Russian, they can use it, but it's not official, it's regional language.
No, I mean, they voted for federal, for let's say, emancipation. What will mean, I don't know. Whether it will be federalization of the country, whether it will be kind of more or less independent regions, I don't know.
Inside of our country, we consider this fact of federal, so-called federalization of some regions is kind of provocations from Russian part, because those people are living since, I don't know, since a pretty long time, and we had no problems with them till some period, some hard, difficult period for our country. And right now, most of information you get from mass media, we live in modern society. It's the time not using of armed forces, it's the time of information on the worst. And you get a lot of information. You should be very attentive what you get. And those people who, those information you get, most of them are from pro-Russian sources. So that's why all representatives of different countries, they're bothered with this information, and they have no correct source of information, but what's really happening in Ukraine.
I totally agree with you, because I did mention this little green man who captured the Crimea. But apart from such kind of intelligence operation, there is also information operation going on. There is a deliberate spreading of information from Russian intelligence sources, which sometimes, let's say, cannot be assessed as true. So it is important to know. We'll see. As I said, the only way to find the solution to this situation is to sit on the table and to discuss all these issues. But whether all parties are ready to accept that there should be a round table for discussion of the future of this country.
Bulgaria, as and Ukraine, it should know that now we should use tools as diplomacy, policy, and talk to each other. But while we were talking, somebody came here to Crimea.
Yeah, of course. Okay, we rest more on the situation in Ukraine and its influence on the Black Sea security. Let's go back maybe to the capabilities, general security issues. How many of you are from ministries of defense? You and